And personally, I had physical and digital surveillance. I had experienced that, and of course, I fear for my life and more for my family. But as human rights defender, we just really have to continue.
I warmly welcome Rose Trajano from the Philippines. Thank you, Rose, for taking the time to share with MISEREOR and our audience your wealth of experience in human rights activism. Our listeners may be interested to know that you've been active in human rights work for more than 35 years. As a trained nurse, you were involved in documenting human rights violations, providing medical and psychosocial care for victims of torture, and for families of victims of extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. But you also worked for the welfare of Filipino migrant workers and child rights, children, by facilitating legal and psychosocial interventions and advocating against trafficking in women. For the past 10 years, actually, you've been the Secretary General of the Philippine Alliance of Human Rights Advocates, called PAHRA, which is a coalition of around 50 organizations working for the human rights in the Philippines. And in 2017, maybe also interesting to mention, the German government awarded you the Franco-German Prize for Human Rights. But over the years, you have also met and worked with many MISEREOR partner organizations in the Philippines. In recent years, MISEREOR has supported PAHRA's work to promote human rights-based governance in the Philippines. Rose, has been only a few weeks since you handed over your duties as Secretary General of PAHRA. Looking back on the 10 years you've been the national and international face of this important human rights network, what were the most important events you remember from those years?
First of all, thank you very much for MISEREOR, and of course to you, Elmar, and for this opportunity to really share what our human rights defenders are experiencing all around the world, and especially from the Philippines. Very memorable for me when I became a PAHRA Secretary General are actually two very distinct political situation and human rights situation in the Philippines. When I came in, it was 2010. No? So 2010 to 2016, it was President Aquino's time. No? And during that administration, there is an open environment and platforms for human rights. There are engagements with the government, and they're just actually one phone call away from the CSOs and from the Commission on Human Rights. We had a national monitoring mechanism then where we can really talk about cases of human rights violations, and several laws on human rights were enacted. But in 2016, Duterte came to town and became president, and the chaos on human rights became the norm, no? And it was really a very dark period again for the Philippines. So, in relation to the administration of Duterte, I am proud, no, that we have expanded the human rights movement in the Philippines by convening in defense of human rights and dignity movement. No? So with PAHRA, with 50 organizations, we expanded to more networks, alliances, and movements, no? From multi-sectoral groups that really would like to contribute in our struggle for human rights. And then in 2020, COVID came, the pandemic, no? So, and it really aggravated the already sorry situation in the Philippines. So three very distinct and very critical events in the Philippines.
Well, yes, actually, Philippines really moved through a hard time, but had hard times before as well, moving from martial law into a democratic sphere where we also had a lot of killings of human rights defenders and prosecutions. Then hope set in just when you took over as PAHRA secretary with the Aquino administration and was so much disappointed during Duterte, with thousands and thousands of people having been killed in these last 8 years, which is terrible. I'm wondering, I'm sitting comfortably in Germany in an environment where civic space is more or less available to all citizens without serious risks if you speak out. It's actually hard to imagine what it means to face all these challenges that you and your colleagues in the Philippines have faced over so many years. What motivated you to become a human rights defender?
Actually, I studied nursing, and I'm supposed to go to the US. This is what my family dreamed for me, to be rich as a nurse in the United States of America. Well, unfortunately, I fell in love with activism in the Philippines, and very fortunate that our college then, the College of Nursing, we have an activist dean, Dean Mary Vita Jackson, and she exposed us to the social realities in the Philippines. So that was 1981 to 1985, and we were also introduced to different NGOs and CSOs in the Philippines, where we learned a lot that there are many areas that we can actually practice our nursing work. So I became, after graduation, I became a community health nurse in the Cordillera, in the mountains, and talking with the masses, with the people, learning from them, learning the realities from these people, and then facilitating and helping out on the development and improvement of their lives. That actually motivated me to continue my work as human rights defender. And learning human rights, you will really love it because it is the essence of our being.
Yes, I can really imagine. And you've been in touch with so many people that you were able to assist and help, but probably also gave courage because they showed courage in their work. But after working practically hands-on for so many years, why did you then answer the call to lead PAHRA and engage more in human rights advocacies, which I imagine is taking you a little bit away from the hands-on practical work of counseling victims and helping, assisting human rights defenders?
Yeah, that's true. But of course, while I am really directly providing services, assistance to beneficiaries, we are also doing some advocacy work, like I was in the health sector, in the migrant sector, and even in the children's sector. And that really strengthened my resolve and actually taught me more. So when Max de Mesa, our former chairperson, asked me if I can help out with PAHRA, I think I was prepared for that because of my years of experience. And it was really very difficult during that time in 2010 because we really do not have any funds in PAHRA, not even enough for salaries. There were only 2 staff and we don't have salary, but we just ensured our government mandated benefits like Social Security and health insurance. But we really pursued our advocacy. It's quite different really. If you provide services, you would need more funds. But if you do advocacy work, you just talk, you just act, and you're really reaching out to people and you're advocating for human rights. So I was prepared for that, and I'm very happy I did that.
That's great to hear. And I mean, having 50 member organizations in the Philippines, I think a network is probably also a bridge from local to national, but it's also a bridge from national to international. As General Secretary of PAHRA, you have been on the boards of international human rights networks such as Forum Asia or the International Federation for Human Rights, FADH. when you see this bridge, local, national, international, what does international solidarity and advocacy work mean for you practically in the Philippines?
Yeah. I think international work, international solidarity work is really very important, very critical, no? Because it supports our national and local advocacy. It was always an enlightening experience for me, learning from the situation of other countries when I attend these meetings and have these discussions, no? And realizing that there are even more countries who have worse situation than the Philippines, no? And more human rights defenders facing more dangerous situation. And it actually added to my motivation and inspiration. It was always satisfying to know that in solidarity, we are in solidarity. I am, or we, PAHRA is contributing somehow to the betterment of the region and of the world, from the international advocacies that we are acting on. And very concretely, of course, when we engage with human rights mechanisms like the ASEAN, the I-Chair, like the UN Human Rights Commission, and even the European Union, these are very critical bodies, mechanisms that we can use for our international advocacy work and even for our national and local work. So this solidarity, with other human rights defenders are really very critical in our work.
Solidarity, I think, is really a good keyword and important for our work, MISEREOR, for your work. I think for societies to be together, to live in harmony. But exactly this type of solidarity in societies is challenged in so many countries in the world. More and more people are talking nowadays about the shrinking space for civil society. What does this mean to you, and how have you experienced this in the Philippines?
We have been experiencing shrinking space since the new administration, since Duterte came, and it actually started with his war on drugs. Activists and human rights defenders are also accused, of helping out drug users, or even us, as protectors of criminals and drug users. So it already started that shrinking space, especially when the president started this intentional distortion of human rights concepts and demonizing human rights defenders. Even saying that journalists can be assassinated. They are not exempted from assassination. The church, and these human rights activists, he is saying, can be killed. The policies of shrinking space started very starkly, about in 2018, when they already issued the Securities and Exchange Commission Memorandum 25, where all NGOs should submit a complete profile of our organizations, including our beneficiaries and even our project partners. So, and then the red tagging list started in February 2019, and then several laws and policies, Executive Order 70, this National Task Force Against Local Communities, and the different memorandum of the Department of Interior and Local Government, which even included these people, the community people, encouraging to do surveillance work against terrorists and against insurgents and drug pushers. And then, of course, in 2020, we have the Anti-Terrorism Act. All of this, really contributed to the shrinking civic space in the Philippines. My alliance, and also I defend, were in the red tag list, starting in February 2019. Our bank accounts were threatened to be closed. And we have news items by the government and by the military calling us virus and terrorist. And personally, I had physical and digital surveillance. I had experienced that. And of course, I fear for my life and more for my family. But as human rights defender, you just really have to continue. It is really very sad to note that several have been killed. Very recently, arrests and detention of activists and human rights defenders continue.
Thank you very much for sharing this. I think, again, I mentioned earlier, it's difficult to imagine what that really means when you sit here comfortably in a safe environment in Germany, day-to-day confrontation with defamation, with threats directly to you, but also your friend, your families. It's sad that the story that you tell us from the Philippines, we hear also from so many other MISEREOR partner organizations all over the world, in many countries. And they have to do their work in this environment, work in political fields sometimes, but very often in social fields, just trying to help people to feed themselves or get education or health care. And still they have to face all these threats, violations, discrimination, defamation, criminalization. When you see the civil society in the Philippines and also MISEREOR partner organizations in the Philippines, you've met so many over the years, and you've been also in touch with networks where our partners try to help each other. How do you see the role of MISEREOR partner organizations in the Philippines, especially in such a very, very challenging and difficult environment?
Yeah, and I'm also very proud to note that there are many MISEREOR partners who are members of PAHRA and members of IDEFEN. And I believe that the work of MISEREOR in the Philippines have been very valuable for decades now, as it addresses important development, humanitarian, and human rights needs of our people, especially the marginalized sector. Your partners work here in the Philippines, MISEREOR partners work on health, on environment rights, on housing, on peace, and now climate concerns, among others, are very important because this addresses the gaps that the government cannot actually provide or unwilling to provide. And MISEREOR, I think, is really contributing to the achievement of the Philippine vision of the government. We have this Vision 2040, development for all, good life for all. And I think MISEREOR is contributing to this, and even to the sustainable development goals that all of us really has to contribute. So I think every project of MISEREOR in the Philippines, there are more Filipinos enjoying their rights and improving their lives. And so all projects of MISEREOR contribute to the betterment of people around the world. So thank you, MISEREOR. Do not stop supporting us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for these words. Actually, we didn't ask for public relations, but it's very nice if partner organizations also see what other partner organizations of MISEREOR are doing, and other civil society organizations in general. The role of civil society in development and also in human rights is so vital. But you also made the bridge to the challenges that we face globally nowadays, like climate change, for example. In MISEREOR, we are discussing a lot at the moment how we can contribute to a socio-ecological transformation, which will be necessary to meet current and future challenges, such as climate change. What does socio-ecological transformation mean to you?
Although we have been discussing social transformation, I think for more than a century, and the importance of ecology and environment for decades, combining these two as framework for transformation become more critical now, no? In the light of the prevailing climate crisis and climate emergency. No? The Philippines is one of the most high-risk countries in the world in relation to climate change. No? But at the same time, extreme poverty and social injustice have not been addressed. So I think this social ecological transformation would contribute, you know, more to a better human rights situation and better development for all. You know? I am happy that during my stint with PAHRA, the discussion on climate change and environment have intensified. You know? And I have learned a lot about that. And if I may suggest to MISEREOR, no, I think concretely the socio-ecological transformation can be included in projects on business and human rights. No? These protect, respect, and remedy principles of the guiding principles on business and human rights combines, of course, state, business sector's responsibility and accountabilities to the communities. No? And at the same time can facilitate empowerment and social justice for those who are impacted by development aggression. So that's my humble recommendation to MISEREOR on socio-ecological transformation.
Thank you very much. I think this recommendation is very well taken. And the dimension that you mentioned on business and human rights and the responsibilities also of the corporate sector to protect and respect basically human rights is very important. That the justice aspect of socio-ecological transformation also links to a question of our global relationships. How do we communicate with each other? How do we respect each other? We are in MISEREOR discussing at the moment the need to decolonize our relationships in a globalized world. The Philippines is a country with a colonial past. What does decolonization mean for you?
First, I would like to emphasize that we are really very happy, you know, that the European Union, including your country, Germany, and of course, MISEREOR, is the largest or biggest supporter of human rights work in the Philippines, no? And even of development work. So if you call that colonization, that's okay with us. Anyway, we submit the project, we inform you that this is what we need and this is what we will do, and you support that. Thank you. But decolonization means now, no, is for me means a genuine independent foreign policy for the Philippines, no, a policy that do not compromise our sovereignty, independence, and international solidarity. But at the same time, no, this foreign policy should promote human rights of all mankind, no. So if you see that this country, this state are violators of human rights, then our country should say something about it, no? And do not tolerate it. At the moment, our government and the Filipino people is in a dilemma of one traditional colonizer, the United States of America, and a new colonizer, the Chinese. So we do not know who will win, but we hope it's the Philippines who will win, the Filipino people.
I think that's very important. Thank you very much, Rose. Towards the end, let us come back to human rights and civic space. There are presidential elections in the Philippines next year. And unfortunately, we've seen in the recent years, and we've mentioned this now in this conversation, that large sections of the public support politicians who ignore human rights principles. And we've seen and heard from you about the consequences if such principles are ignored, very tragic consequences. What is your hope for the future of the Philippines, seeing the coming elections, this new era, which might start next year or not? And how do you see the role of civil society in shaping this future?
Before Duterte, our human rights is not perfect. Yeah? But it is better than what we have now. And at least we want to get back to that level of promotion, respect, and protection of human rights. No? Right now, the different opposition groups, including political parties, civil society organizations, are now trying to convince each other that we should set aside our differences, you know, and that we need each other to be victorious over this current administration. The administration which created a civil and political rights havoc and ignored social justice concerns of the Philippines. We have to be victorious over them. We cannot let their endorsed people will win, because we know that the administration or their governance would just continue. No? PAHRA and I Defend, in fact, is in the process of discussing electoral engagement and our human rights electoral agenda that will be put forward to political candidates at the national and local level. No? But of course, very critical is the role of the electorate, especially the youth. No? They have to vote. They have to register so they can vote. And they have to understand their right to good governance and their right to suffrage. And this is what we should work on right now.
Yeah, I think setting priorities right, very good. And but easy said, very difficult to do. I really wish you will succeed on this. Perhaps from there, last but not least, what do you think other countries can learn from the Philippines?
Our democracy is very fragile. It's heartbreaking to actually admit that. No? But after 4 decades, after our historic people power to oust a dictator, the administration, 5 administrations, maintained its neoliberal policy and the rule of the elite. And it did not change the conditions of the marginalized people. Thus, when a strongman came and promised the moon and the star, we further compromised our democracy. But we want everyone to know that the Filipinos are resilient. We have a very dynamic and strong civil society organization, and we will not allow a full consummation of an authoritarian rule. We will continue to resist, and we will continue to prevail. So help us, God.
Thank you very much, Rose, and continue to resist, refuse to be victims, and choose to be resources, what a partner organization from us in the Philippines actually once said, I think is very important. And having traveled, had the privilege to meet many people in the Philippines, I really think there are so many people in your lovely country who have this spirit, and we hope that they will have the power for change. And with this, Rose, I thank you for this most interesting conversation. I really wish your hopes and dreams come true, and for the Filipino people to have more peace and a life of dignity for all. Thank you very much, Rose Trajano.
Thank you.